Welcome to the History Unplugged podcast, the unscripted show that celebrates unsung heroes, myth-busts historical lies, and rediscovers the forgotten stories that changed our world. I'm your host, Scott Rank.
All right, guys, welcome back, and Scott Rank and I are talking about movies we love and we hate. And today, Scott is presenting a movie that he loves that I was a little shocked when he said that he loved this historical movie. And I'm actually your co-host on your Civil War series said that he loved this movie. James Early loved this movie as well. So two people say they love this movie, and I'm doubly as shocked that they loved Dracula Untold. So Scott, tell us a little bit about the plot, the overview of the movie, so that we can get into why you love this movie so much. I think I'm going to have a decent job in fighting against this movie.
Steve, have you ever watched a movie and you felt like this movie was made for me and absolutely nobody else? Have you ever felt that before?
Sure.
That's what I felt like, because listeners, this is a very silly movie. I want to make that very clear now. Half of it is They have kind of a pretty straightforward historical narrative, and I'm going to argue that they do a surprisingly well job. The other half to two-thirds of it are what I would like to call supernatural shenanigans, where they're trying to cram X-Men, Lord of the Rings, any Harry Potter, whatever fantasy nonsense you can cram into a movie, comic book movie they try to do. But I love it because I think my tastes run pretty silly with movies. I kind of like to turn off my brain with movies, and I enjoy schlock. I enjoy the Fast and the Furious series, and the character who plays Vlad Dracula, he's one of those guys, you wouldn't be able to name him. He's one of those, have you seen him in something before? What is he? He's a villain in one of the Fast and the Furious movies, if that makes any difference. It's a schlocky, silly movie. It's 90 minutes, but the historical stuff in this movie, they have absolutely no right getting it as right as they do. And I'm an Ottoman historian. I kind of know my way around the Ottoman Empire. They didn't have to do as well as they did in so many things. When I watch a bad historical movie like we've done in this series, like Dan Brown's Da Vinci Code, the movie version, or Kingdom of Heaven, or when I'm taking notes and watching it, I'm just typing away, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong. When I was watching this movie, I would write in my notes, wait, is that right? Wait, is that costume right? That Ottoman costume, I've seen that before, but would that soldier wear that? So yeah, I maybe had to double back and think about things. So that's kind of my general feeling of the movie. Let me give some background to make sense before I get into the historical things. So this movie came out in 2014. This was Universal Studios' aborted attempt to make their own cinematic universe like Marvel. They wanted their own Marvel cinematic universe, and Universal had all this intellectual property of monster movies from the 1930s that maybe your great-grandfather would have watched, like Dracula or Frankenstein, or The Invisible Man, The Mummy. So this was the first movie to try to launch that, and then a couple years later, they rebooted an attempt to launch this with a Tom Cruise film called The Mummy, which was terrible. It was so bad, the whole attempt at the cinematic universe died. So this is one of the artifacts left over from that attempt. So this movie, it does Dracula Untold. It doesn't try to use the storyline of Bram Stoker's 1897 novel Dracula, or the movie of that came out in the early 90s with Gary Oldman and others. Instead, it creates an origin story for the title character, Count Dracula. And in this version, Dracula is Vlad the Impaler, the real-life Prince of Wallachia, which I'll mention. So let me just mention some historical background before we get into the film itself. So Vlad Dracula, he was born in 1431 in what is today Romania. At the time, it was the province of Wallachia. And in the movie, they refer to themselves as Transylvanians. They would not have referred to themselves as Transylvanians. They would have referred to themselves as Wallachians. So Vlad's father, Vlad II, was a commander in the Wallachian army. And the Holy Roman Emperor Sigismund bestowed upon him the honor of being a member of the Order of the Dragon. So that's where Vlad Dracul means dragon, comes from. This was a secret fraternal order of knights created to protect the interests of the Roman Catholic Church, which included protecting Eastern Europe from Ottoman forces and their religious practices. So at this time in the 15th century, the Ottoman Empire is on an absolute tear. It had conquered much of southeastern Europe. It conquered Belgrade in 1389. It conquered Constantinople in 1453, destroyed the Byzantine Empire. It is truly on the way to becoming a global empire. It controls essentially all of Anatolia, parts of the Middle East. It controls Egypt. Well, no, that's in the 1520s. Sorry, listeners. But it's moving aggressively into Eastern Europe, and it's less than a century away from conquering Hungary and reaching the gates of Vienna. So this is the aggressive growth stage of the Ottoman Empire. So the Order of the Dragon that Vlad's father was a member of, it gave him the distinction of being referred to as Dragon or Dracul, a name Vlad Tepes, later adopted as Son of Dragon or Dracula. That's what that means. After Vlad II accepted his commission as a member of the order, the Ottoman army made its way toward Romania or Wallachia with the intention of warring with the Kingdom of Hungary. In an effort to walk the line between appeasing Hungary but appeasing the Ottoman Empire, Vlad II served a short time as a prince of Wallachia for Hungary before switching teams and joining the Ottomans. So he hopes to remain an independent vassal state. That's the hope of Wallachia at this time. Joining the Ottomans gave everyone pause. His two young sons, Vlad III and Radu, were taken into captivity by Sultan Murad II, and they were held as collateral to compel Vlad II to keep his word, to keep up the alliance, which he didn't. This is a royal ransom where young youths are in captivity of an enemy, which has happened many times throughout history and a practice that goes to antiquity. The event which Vlad is famous for and why he is known as Vlad the Impaler is this. When Ottoman Sultan Mehmet II, who conquered Constantinople in 1453, he threatened to overtake Wallachia if Vlad did not agree to an annual tribute. In 1461, Vlad refused to pay the tribute and prepared for an Ottoman invasion. His army was nowhere near the size of the Ottomans, which had hundreds of thousands of soldiers and some of the most well-trained in Eurasia almost. So Mehmet raided Ottoman towns in the Black Sea vicinity until then. In June 1462, Mehmet crossed the Danube into Wallachian territory with an army of 90,000 Ottomans, 25,000 of which were his Janissary Corps, and I'll mention more on them in a second. He wanted to make Wallachia a buffer state between his lands and the Catholic West. So Mehmet took with him Vlad's brother Radu, who had been with his army for many years and had converted to Islam, I believe, and wanted to place him on the Wallachian throne. So what happened is, what was standing in his way was Vlad and only 22,000 men. He was outnumbered 4-1, so what he did was use guerrilla hit-and-run tactics and a scorched earth policy to demoralize the Ottomans. What he did to demoralize them is what he's famous for, and the Byzantine chronicler Chalcondylas describes the scene that the Ottoman soldiers witnessed. He wrote, "We marched for about 5 kilometers when he saw his men impaled. The Sultan's army came across a field with stakes, about 3 kilometers long and 1 kilometer wide. And there were large stakes on which they could see the impaled bodies of men, women, and children, about 20,000 of them. As I said, quite a spectacle for the Turks and the Sultan himself. The Sultan himself, in wonder, kept saying that he could not conquer the country of a man who could do such terrible and unnatural things and put his power and his subjects to such use. And other Turks, seeing so many people impaled, were scared out of their wits." So that's what happened. The Wallachians are captured later, but that's what Vlad the Impaler did. Now, there are some historical debates on whether he was as brutal as they say, or if it were German merchants in his domain who were kicked out and created these fantastic stories, because he's sort of a national hero in Romania, as like a freedom fighter of sorts. One other thing I just want to mention real quick is, two other things, and I don't want to go on too long, is the Janissary system. In the movie, it talks about the practice of the Sultan going to Christian lands and recruiting boys into the Sultan's army, where they're recruited, they become slaves, they're compelled to convert to Islam, and trained as his elite soldiers. That definitely did happen. There's a lot of folklore still in the Orthodox world in Eastern Europe about the Turks doing this, and stories of martyrs who refused to give up their sons and they were killed for their faith. So there's a lot of folklore surrounding this. So what essentially happened is that about 1 in 40 households, there would be a collection where Ottoman troops would go through and they would collect youths in order to enter this army. There are questions about its legality in Islamic law, and it happened from the 14th to the late 16th centuries, and it ended about the 18th century. So what would happen was that a Janissary officer, the Janissary were the elite soldiers, they would go to villages, they would gather together the sons of different people, and the age could be 10, 14, 15, and at most 17 or 18, but not much older than that. So there's a guide from the 17th century called the Laws of the Janissaries, which kind of gives us best practices on what Janissaries should do, that was written in Ottoman Turkish. What it says is that the officers in charge should not take the sons of important men, priests, or men of good descent, because capturing too many noble sons could foment discord and maybe lead to a rebellion. They also said they should not take only sons because these help their fathers in farm work. The Ottomans didn't really care about the family structure. They just they wanted farms to operate because they wanted to get tax money. So that's mostly the reason. They said that they should not take orphans into the Janissary Corps because they are opportunistic and undisciplined. It also says they shouldn't take boys with a squint because they're perverse and obstinate. So physiognomy science, that's kind of interesting. They shouldn't take tall boys because they're stupid, or short boys because they're troublemakers. I have no idea where they get this from, but there they go.
It's interesting. Historically, did the Turks and Turkish groups do that sort of thing where they would compel the people that they had conquered to recruit a certain amount of boys to become elite members of their military?
Oh, well, not... what they would do is when they would go to villages, it's hard to know what this looked like in practice. They would go to a town square and they would take about 1 out of 40. And it's sort of, as a soldier, you would look at what looks like a young, sturdy lad. The image and what Dracula Untold thinks are where like boys are being ripped from their families and their crying mothers. That very well could have happened in certain situations. But there were other situations too where families wanted their sons to enter the force because it's not like they completely lost contact with their sons altogether. Their sons were becoming basically Delta Force. They could potentially become very wealthy through their military service. They would have close contacts with the Sultan. They might be able to marry after they retire a noble woman. And if the sons came back to their village, they might be personally related to someone who could give them a lot of political clout. So, for example, the chief advisor of the Sultan in the 1520s, in the 1540s or so, who was of Serbian background, his brother was the head of the Serbian Orthodox Church, and he was the second in command of the Ottoman Empire. He had converted to Islam, so that's kind of the messy sort of outcomes that the system produces.
Yeah, I guess there would have to be a certain amount of incentive for them to want to be elite troops, that you can't just bring somebody in and snatch you away from your mother's arms and expect you that you're going to be the top of the line troop and eventually a lot of them becoming administrators if there isn't some way that you're going to benefit from it.
Right, and that's also the advantage of going to villages and not taking the sons of the elite, because if it's people who are poor and marginalized, then they don't really have the ability to come together and fight back in a meaningful way if they don't like the system. If you're going after elites, then that would really compel Wallachians to run off and probably complain to the Hungarian kingdom or the Holy Roman Empire, saying, "Hey, we are glad to join with you in a military alliance." So the Ottomans were much smarter in that in their statecraft, so that's why they didn't do that. One last thing I want to mention is the issue. Many people will say that Vlad Dracul is the direct inspiration for Count Dracula because the names are similar. But I read a MA thesis on this exact topic, and there's not